Hi, Save Jerseyans. This is Matt Rooney from SaveJersey.com, and we're continuing our season of meeting candidates up and down the Garden State. We're in CD3 right now, and we're meeting none other than Tom MacArthur. He is a Republican candidate for the 3rd Congressional District. As you know, a couple Republicans are vying to replace John Runyon, who's retiring. And we're really excited that he could meet us today. We're actually here at Pizza Uno. We're getting ready for a Young Republican meeting, which will be a lot of fun.
Yes, indeed.
Tom, thanks for coming out and talking to us.
My pleasure, Matt.
Now, first and foremost, Congress, big undertaking. You're not new to public service, but what made you decide to run this year?
Well, the seat's available. That's certainly one thing.
That's a good step.
And I believe I can make a difference. I have a different background than many people. I have been in politics for a limited amount of time, but I've been in the private sector for a long time, 3 decades, and I believe I understand how the world works, and in particular how jobs get created. And I believe I can make a difference, and that's why I'm running.
It's no secret the economy remains sluggish. It has for a painful amount of years at this point. What is your experience as a job creator that you mentioned a moment ago? You've been in the private sector for a while. And most importantly, what do you think that Washington's doing poorly right now to help create an environment that cultivates job growth? And what you, Tom MacArthur, can do to help move us in the right direction if you make it down to Washington, D.C.?
Okay, that's a great question. Just a little background. I started my career in the insurance industry in 1982, and I started as a $13,000 a year claims adjuster in New York City. I've had a lot of jobs since then.
That won't get you too far in Manhattan this day and age.
That's true. Didn't get you that far. I
can imagine.
But I learned a lot, and I, toward the end of my career, had the privilege of leading what was then a small company, local company, but we grew it throughout the United States. Today it employs close to 4,000 people.
Wow.
And I had a lot of jobs in between where I was able to grow whatever I was running, add people, add offices. So I do understand that, and I think first and foremost, most job creation activity happens in the private sector. I'm not saying there's no government role directly. There is in infrastructure and other areas, but most of it happens in the private sector, and it needs to. What government can do, and I think that helps, and what it's not been doing very well, certainly for the last 5 years, is creating an environment where there's predictability and stability. When you can't see around the bend, you don't make decisions. You put off capital decisions, you put off hiring decisions, you don't do acquisitions, and that's the environment that this administration has created in the last 5 years. You never know what's coming next, whether it's healthcare, whether it's environmental laws. The rules are changing all the time. I think another issue is regulation. Regulation should control bad actors. It shouldn't tell industries how to function. It shouldn't pick winners and losers, which this administration does a lot of. And I think these are the 2 primary areas. There's also the credit markets, which are very much influenced by the government. There's tax policy, which makes a difference on business decisions. And as I mentioned, there's direct investment in infrastructure. All those things have an influence on job creation. And I believe government can help or hurt. It's been hurting.
It has been hurting. And you mentioned healthcare policy and tax policy as being 2 of the ways in which it's really hurting. Obviously, that implicates Obamacare. It's April 1st. We had the deadline. It passed. We're going to find out exactly how well it did in the final run-up to the deadline that people had to enroll. I suspect that is not going to be complimentary to the administration and its efforts. As a businessman, can you explain to us, because I think this is so key for Republicans running up and down the ballot this year, exactly why Obamacare is so harmful, not just to our healthcare system and people remaining healthy and living active lives, but also to their job prospects?
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, even though today is a deadline, I don't think we really will understand whether Obamacare has moved in any kind of forward direction, because you don't know how many people are signing up because they lost their old insurance. I'm
Right.
one of them. I got a letter from my insurer
You did
canceling
get a
my
cancellation,
policy
yeah.
because they weren't allowed to write that policy under Obamacare. So forcing somebody off their old plan that they liked and onto a government plan is no kind of success in my mind. You don't know whether people are paying their premiums. There's too much you don't know. But to the law itself, Obamacare, I think, is a disaster because it takes over an entire industry. It starts with a couple of questions like, what do we do for the uninsured? How do we give people affordable access to health care insurance? And it ends up with sweeping regulation that is a grand social experiment. And it's failing as a grand social experiment. It's one size fits all. It's driving costs up. It's doing nothing about tort reform, which is the only thing really that can drive costs down. It's changing the way medicine is practiced. It's forcing people into behaviors they don't want. It's government deciding what coverages you have and you need to have. It's government telling employers what coverages they need to offer. It's what we need is market-based reforms that drive costs down and give people choice in their life. That's what we need. And that's what we can achieve if we elect a Republican House, Republican Senate, and in 2 years a Republican president. Obamacare can go away, and it needs to.
And the presumptive Democrat nominee, who I won't mention her name because I'm not going to give her free press, but running here in CD3, she not too long ago went on Dom Giordano's program. I will give Dom free press because he's a good guy over in Philadelphia. And he asked her point blank, okay, you admit that Obamacare is flawed as a Democrat, but you won't tell us what you will fix. Can you tell me today what you would fix? She was unable to name anything that she would do. You started to talk about free market solutions that we could actually implement that would help improve our healthcare system. What are some of them?
For one, employers have been, by and large, for a long time, the primary source of healthcare insurance for most people. And we had laws allowing people to move, if they're in a policy at an employer, they can move to another employer, or they can't be denied for a pre-existing condition. That's been the law, and I believe it's a good law. People shouldn't be knocked out for a pre-existing condition if they're going from plan to plan. That gives people portability in their employment. They're not locked into one. We also have 3 potential baskets for people who can't get insurance through their employer. You have Medicare for our seniors. You have veterans insurance obviously for our veterans. And you have Medicaid for people who can't afford it. Medicaid could have been expanded for people that had no access to health care insurance. It wasn't necessary to force it the way we're doing it now. And employers, by and large, are offering insurance. It's a very, very small percentage of employers that employ in excess of 50 people who don't currently offer insurance to people. And in a competitive marketplace, those employers won't do very well. And so it's really not necessary to do what was done.
First step before we get to November is getting through June.
Yes, it did.
And particularly because, unfortunately for political bloggers like myself that love a good fight, we don't have many competitive congressional districts in New Jersey. This is one of them. Your primary opponent is Steve Lonigan.
Yes.
At the moment. I'm just going to ask you straight up, what makes you, with about 2 months to go before voters in CD3 are going to choose, a better choice for Republicans than former Mayor Lonigan?
Okay, great question. I think there's a couple of issues. One is personal. Steve Lonigan has failed 5 times to get elected for broader office. And I think that shows a lack of connection with voters. You can't lead, you can't change, you can't do any good if you can't get elected. And Steve Lonigan has not made a connection with voters. I believe I can. I've lived a different life than him. I have different focus. In business, you have to make connections with people or you don't survive. And I believe I'll be able to overcome that. Secondly, I think there's some policy issues that are a problem with him that are different with me. One is Steve Lonigan opposed Sandy Aid. He called it a bailout. He acted as if people whose lives were turned upside down in Sandy somehow weren't worthy of federal aid. And this in a state, New Jersey, where only 61 cents on every dollar we pay in federal tax comes back.
That's true.
I think that's what was a terrible decision on his part. Our people deserve the support that they're getting. Secondly, he stated when he was running for Senate that he's opposed to a military expansion. He called our military bloated and said he was going to cut military spending. I think that's a terrible mistake for our country, our standing in the world, and it's a terrible mistake for the district that we're sitting in the middle of right now, that has the largest joint base in the country, employs 44,000 people, contributes $8 billion to our economy. It's certainly not good for you. So I think these are two major areas why Steve Lonergan cannot be successful in the primary or certainly in the general election. His tax policy is a whole other area. His proposed flat tax would raise income tax on 70% of people. That's not a conservative position. You don't raise taxes on people, and that was his record when he was mayor. He raised taxes on people and took government bailouts from the state of New Jersey.
Now, most conservatives do support a flatter tax system. I know there's a whole bunch of proposals going around right now. David Camp recently had his own proposal. I'm sure Mayor Lonergan has his own ideas. What's a way in which that you, if you were in Washington, and I think you've described yourself on your website as a conservative, what's a way in which you want to make taxes generally less of a burden for the average American family and the average businessman from the federal perspective?
Well, I think the way you frame that is the right way to frame it. How to make taxes less burdensome. The progressive income tax is in and of itself not what creates a tax burden. What creates a tax burden is the tax rates are too high. We have among the highest corporate income tax rates in the world. Our personal income tax rates are too high. That is because we have a government that's addicted to spending. And until we have spending reform, you can't have meaningful tax reform. And so I think it boils down to bringing costs of government down. And then yes, we do need tax reform. Our tax code is terribly complicated.
Sure. It goes back to predictability, like you said before. Every year you can't plan.
And I was just thinking this week about something that may not be top of most people's mind, but corporate earnings that are overseas, they stay overseas because they're taxed if they come back. So companies make the decision to leave them over. What caught my attention was the Russell 1000. There's just 1,000 companies in the United States have $2.1 trillion parked overseas right now. These are U.S. companies that have $2.1 trillion sitting overseas. If we had tax policies that encourage that money to come back and be invested in our own infrastructure, that could do an enormous amount of good and raise tax revenues.
And I don't think people understand that. I mean, if some of these companies could make money here, they would. They're just making business decisions. So we have to create an environment where people can make money in the United States again, employing American workers.
Or if they do have overseas operations, if they bring that money back in the right form and it's invested in our own economy, well then you create tax policy to encourage that. So I think tax reform is necessary, but the real problem with our taxes is our spending is too high.
I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. We can argue tax policy all day, spending way too much money, absolutely. It's pretty clear to me, and from people that I've talked to about you, that you seem to very much be enjoying your time on the campaign trail. But that's only half the equation, of course. How's your family enjoying your time on the campaign trail? Maybe you can tell us a little about them.
Okay. Well, I have been married to my college sweetheart Debbie for 31 years. We've had 3 children. Our oldest, we were privileged to share for 11 years in this life. She was a special needs child, and her name was Grace, very important to us. We adopted our second 2 children, both as infants. David's now 23. He's married. Lives near here, actually.
There you go.
And our youngest is 16. She's working her way through high school. And it's really my wife and daughter that have the most impact. Debbie and our youngest, Isabella. They've both been very supportive. They're probably enjoying it a little less than me, but they've been very supportive, and they believe I can make a difference, and they've encouraged me to do it.
It's fantastic. Now, of course, we look forward to meeting them, and we hope to talk to you more as the primary season progresses. And then, of course, if you get past June, we'll want to talk to you as you take on the Democrats. In the interim, if people watch this interview and their appetite is whetted and they want to get involved with your campaign, what's the best way to do so?
The best way is our website, TMAC4Congress. That's TMAC, the number 4, Congress.com. And there's ability to make phone calls there, to leave email messages, and get all the rest. We would encourage anybody who's interested. We need help and support in that campaign.
Yeah, no doubt about it. This is an extremely important seat. We need to hold on to it, and we wish you all the best as you go out there and you interact with CD3 and help move the ball forward.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for meeting us, Tom.
Thank you. Nice to meet all of you.